Eddie Bennett of Voodoo Queen Studios created the Blade Runner Build-Off Pink Slip Challenge over on the Facebook Custom Diecast Renegades and Hoodlums group. Eddie had 18 of these Hot Wheels Evil Twin castings that he provided to the first 18 people that responded to his post, saying they wanted to participate in the challenge. I was fortunate enough to be one of those participants. The theme of the build is to create a car that might be found in the world of the movie Blade Runner. The Ridley Scott film is set in a dystopian future Los Angeles of 2019. Yeah, the film was made back in 1982. And that Los Angeles was a decaying, dark, troubling world that included flying cars. Now, for this build, I didn't want to bury this casting in a bunch of futuristic 3D printed parts, but I wanted to try and retain as much of the beauty of the classic body lines of the Evil Twin as I could. It's based upon a 1950s Cadillac. I'm sure some of you recognize it. I wanted to retain those lines while at the same time convert it into a spinner. Spinner is the generic term for flying cars in the movie. They can be driven as ground-based vehicles, wheels and tires, but they can also fly. The car was conceived and designed by Syd Mead, and later on you'll see I referred to his artwork, and you'll see some shots of the interior that I referred to. So I made some cuts to this body, and yep, out came the JB Weld. This casting, when all was said and done at the end of this, I probably used more JB Weld on this build than I have on any other build, quite possibly including some of the K7 conversions, which are much larger. But I cut out that front engine area and got some of the JB Weld set up in that section. And then I wanted to cut these back sections off to taper off the back end, because this is going to have two front wheels and one centered wheel underneath the back. I get to that point. Some of my plans didn't work out the way I originally thought, but there you can see when I cut those sections off and tapered the back, it has a much more futuristic look, very much like the spinner. And here comes more JB Weld. Now the colorful things you see over to the left, that's clay that I've bought to use for a variety of reasons in these builds. And for this one, I end up using clay to block off sections where I want to put the wheels or where I want to keep JB Weld out of. You see that little ball of orange clay in the center of the casting there. What I was doing was creating an opening for that back wheel. And so you can see the JB Weld's still pretty wet at this point. I'm still slopping it in there. Once it's in, then I center that piece of clay. And that basically gives me the pocket where I can put that wheel. And it turned out pretty well, for that first setup there. You see the pocket. Now, obviously, Hot Wheels wheels aren't going to fit into this. What I had thought was I was going to try and fit wheels also into those front two pontoon areas. It didn't quite work out that way. I couldn't put wheels in there. There wasn't enough body for me to do it, and maybe if I approached it a little differently, again with styrene, I could have pulled something off, but it would have been flimsy. So what I ended up doing, I looked around for wheels. I thought about narrowing wheels, and then it dawned on me, well, Tootsie Toy wheels will give me the stance that I want. I don't want really extremely prominent wheels. Obviously, I can't swing them out of the way. And yet I wanted to conceivably be able to roll. And while this thing doesn't roll fantastically, those front wheels turn. The back wheel does turn once I put them in. So that that worked the way I wanted. Now, obviously, this involved a lot of filling, a lot of sanding, Bondo spot putty going on things afterward for additional smoothing. But what I really liked, and I'm sure some of you will agree with it, some of you will disagree with it, but I really did retain that kind of classic 1950s Cadillac look. That didn't get abandoned in making this. I didn't use the base, the original base from the Hot Wheels car. The metal base got tossed aside. The engine section got tossed aside. I used a small portion of the interior and half the glass. Now that's how I ended up mounting the front wheels. Those are toothpicks stuck in those little brass tubes for now, just to keep putty and paint out. But those are going to be little stub axles. That's going to come out, the Tootsie Toy stub axles are going to go in. The JB Weld worked pretty well for this. It's interesting how heavy this casting is. And the styrene section at this point, just for the base, is removable, so I can put the glass and the interior in. Obviously, this is a futuristic car, so when it comes time to do the interior, I wasn't quite sure how I was going to go. But for the outside, I knew I kind of wanted this dark silver. I wanted it to be metallic, but I wanted the dark look. And if you look at a lot of the Blade Runner information, from the movie, it is a dark, brooding time. The glass obviously needed to be cut in half. I'm only going to use the front windshield since there is no back window. You had to be careful dropping things in there, then you had to fish them out. It was just a tight fit. I did retain the interior. And like I said, when I was working on the interior, it was kind of interesting. It has a little folding front on that Hot Wheels. There you can see it. And because of that, it won't fit. But naturally, I needed the dash. So I ended up just using CA glue and baking powder, because it's that weird plastic. And so the baking powder really made it strong. And I started adding, even though this thing is a metallic, dark metallic gray, I tried to add a lot of different kinds. Unfortunately, a lot of the shading gets lost in the photos, and then when I put the matte clear coat over it, some of it got lost somehow in the process. I think I need to use a different matte clear coat as well, because it causes some of it to just wash away in a way. I'm not sure where it goes other than disappearing. I put those red, basically those are in effect brake lights on the back. They are not propulsion for this. And there's also an upward facing brake light. You see, originally I think it's designed to be like the license plate frame. I used that as basically a brake light. I did paint white, basically silver down and then white over it for the headlights. And then I also put the orange indicator lights at the front. It was interesting because looking at Blade Runner photos and artistic interpretations, it's interesting how some of the lighting is. There's a lot of lighting on some. Again, I was trying to keep the classic look in a way. I busted out the pencils to highlight areas, and I just tried to add shading to that gray. I wanted it to be dark and murky, and yet at the same time have some highlights picked out. The pencils are always interesting to use. You've seen me use them on earlier builds. And I need more practice with them. I think it's one of those things that the more you practice with it, the better you're bound to get. And I just don't use them that often. And so but I need to use them when I can. And then it's null oil time. Because everything dirty and grimy needs a nice healthy coat of null oil. Again, I was careful not to wash out some of those areas with the null oil, the areas that I had done earlier. But I wanted it to help provide even more grunge, for lack of a better term. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. It's an oily, grimy world. I'm hoping you can kind of see the 50s Cadillac thrown into the future look to this. Now there's one of Syd Mead's, one of the pieces of artwork about the interior design. And looking at that, the steering wheel had to go. So that was easy to cut out of there. And then I went with a brighter color because on those artist concepts, they are bright colors for the dash because they're illuminated panels. I wasn't going to be able to do that the way I necessarily wanted to on the dash. But I went with what I could, and I think it turned out pretty well. You can kind of see I added some color and added some detail to the center console. Went over that with null oil to add detail to the seats and detail to the dash that typically it's just washed out. And there you can see a little farther along the process. And yes, those are null oil streaks on my thumb where I'd wipe the brush off so that it wouldn't be too wet. I wanted it to be somewhat dry as I was doing that. So I was pretty happy with how the interior turned out. Then it came time to glue the Tootsie Toy axles and wheels in the front. Again, those were the little brass tubes I had put in there. I tried shoving the CA glue back into the tube and then just slide the axle, which was surprisingly difficult, into those tubes. It is open across the center. They are independent axles. Because I wanted the look from the spinner in the movie where it was open, there were just the two prongs sticking out. I wanted to definitely have wheels, though. I didn't want that to go away. Because, again, these are ground-based and flying vehicles. And then you see the other Tootsie Toy wheel just drop into the notch. I cut a couple grooves for the axle to be held in, and it works surprisingly well. This is a kind of unusual final assembly. Typically, I'm putting these together, putting a screw into them, and then rolling them across the desk. Well, that's not happening with this one because, there is no traditional base to this. So I just CA glue the glass in. Get it situated. Drop in the interior. A little bit better look at it there. Like I said, it is kind of a tight fit on these pieces, which is good. It's not I'm not knocking that. I was pleased how it came together, considering I got rid of the entire base and really didn't recreate one. That's all, what you're seeing in the front half and the back half, that's all JB Weld. And you can imagine it's a very solid casting now. That just presses in place, glued it in, presses into place. And then I went with lead belcher on the edges of the base. And I like the fact that it is slightly different color-wise than the casting, because again, those doors should be swinging out of the way. So there's where we started, the original Evil Twin casting. I'd like to thank Eddie Bennett again for holding this challenge. It was interesting. It made me think a lot, made me try some things maybe I wouldn't have normally done, and made me use a lot of JB Weld, but Lord knows, I've got more. There's where I ended up. I think you still see the classic 50s CAD, and yet it has the futuristic look of the spinner. This is not a pretty car by any means. This is a dark and brooding kind of look. I wish you could see some of the well, you kind of can there. See some of the differences in coloring. But I hope you like this build. I know it's different. Here are some glamour shots. So thank you all for watching this video. Please check out other people who are participating in the challenge. That's the leftover stuff. Thank you to all my patrons. And don't forget, the 3 Blind Mice have a Gaslands build coming February 6th. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful new year. Catch you in the next one.